What's going on, boys? Thanks to our patrons and Fiverr customers, subscribe to our Patreon free for behind-the-scenes stuff, arm yourselves, life stuff. This one will be a bit of a grab bag, but it's all under one umbrella. And that umbrella is the way the world has felt the last few days. It feels like the veil is thinning. I've been walking around in a daze. Weird stuff has been happening, and the way things have felt generally has been odd. And it seems like it's not just me. Sometimes you feel something and you tell yourself it's just you, and then you ask around and you find out other people have been feeling the same way. So I don't think this is just imagination. I'm not sure what it is, but I don't think it's nothing. Multiple people in my vicinity have died. The tarot readings I've been doing for people in the last few days have been coming out sharp and heightened, almost frenzied, and it feels like something is nearby. But this time, not exactly in a bad way. It feels like spiritual activity is kicking up, and we should be celebrating. This feels like actual Halloween. And that got me thinking a little bit about dates. Maybe there are holidays we should celebrate, not just man-made holidays, but man-made holidays that came about in response to something happening in the noosphere, or whatever you want to call it. But they're difficult to plan for because you don't know when they're going to happen. And while I was thinking about this, getting ready for this video, I remembered something in the Book of Hours, which is a game. It's the sister game to Cultist Simulator. Randomly, a different, quotes, weather will pop up. It feels more like a holiday. It's random. It throws off your routine, bars you from doing normal stuff, but the supernatural is thick in the air, and more supernatural opportunities present themselves. That feels like what we've been going through these last couple days. And maybe it'll last a couple days more, I'm not sure. Anyway, it's Halloween in January. If you have some spiritual stuff to do, or spiritual stuff you would like to engage in, partake in the festivities, now's the time to do it. And on that note, there are some spiritual type things I would like to talk about. And I took notes for this video. So the first point would be lifting the veil. I think there are moments for individuals, an individual feels the veil thinner, and then I'm guessing there are moments like these in which the veil is thinner for everybody. But what does that entail? Well, I think there are levels and frequencies of supernatural happenings. So on the highest level, these are moments that you can't really deny something is happening. It's definitely not your imagination. Maybe if you're more of an atheist persuasion, you're having some kind of an episode, but something serious enough is happening that it needs an explanation. You can't just ignore it. For me, an example of one of these high-level events would be that visitation I had last week. I can feel something in my room screwing with me. It's there. My consciousness is jacked up. I can't think. I have to sense. My five senses, I can't go into thinking space. And even stuck in my senses feel weird. And then the next day, or the 2 days afterward, I find out that night there was some murderer wandering around. High level event. Maybe not the highest level event possible, but again, these are the moments you cannot deny something is happening. And then you have the lowest level events. Things you could and probably would attribute to your imagination. And I had a couple of them in a row today. Randomly, I feel the area I'm working in get colder. Maybe I'm just feeling colder, maybe that's my imagination, maybe something's up with the thermostat. I feel like something is nearby. Well, I'm paranoid. Maybe I'm just feeling something weird, probably just my imagination. I see shadows in certain parts of my office space get darker, and there's nobody there. Trick of the light mixed with paranoia, probably. I see what I recognize to be the Hat Man out of the corner of my eye, and when I look, it's just something tall and shadowy, but it's, like a shelf or something. Nothing's actually there. And that happens a couple times. Well, you're paranoid. And you're just seeing things. All these things you can write off, and you probably do. That's the levels. The lowest level, you can brush something off. The highest levels, you can't. But then we get into frequency. So for me, even the lowest levels of these events don't happen to me super frequently. As in, you see something very minorly weird that can be explained but is a little odd once a week or so. And I think that is normal when the veil is thickest. The frequency is a little different when the veil is thin. You won't just see these low intensity events one at a time and with a fair amount of time in between. You'll see them combo you, not going to sugarcoat it, in the span of a couple minutes. Individually, those are easy to write off. And even together, you aren't getting that overwhelming supernatural feeling, so you'll still probably write them off, but enough of them have happened to you in short enough span of time, you're aware something is going on, even if you don't feel it. Something, even if it is explainable, something odd. These small events combine into, let's say, a mid-level event. Still explainable, but you notice it, and you pay attention to it. Now, when the veil is thin, I think you have the option of not just experiencing a thinned veil, but lifting the veil yourself. And I think when you lift the veil yourself in a time that the veil can be lifted, you get high frequency, high level events. And maybe even higher. Now, what does lifting the veil look like? Or how does one do it? Well, for us, or at least for me, for lower level mages, it feels like dipping your feet in shark-infested water. And there are two ways to do this, but let's start with the perhaps more theatrical version. So last night, after some high-intensity work, I got the suspicion maybe something is going on. As in, things had been happening, but after last night's high-intensity work, it hit me, maybe we're in the middle of some kind of event. So I figured I would listen to, I don't know if it's magnetic frequencies or radio frequencies, the sounds the planets make that people pick up and record here. And those are interesting, by the way, because even though that sounds like a silly little whatever thing, if you listen to them all, you'll notice the planets, they don't just sound different. Each of the frequencies has its own character. And I think it's no mistake, of all those frequencies, the Earth's is the most lively, which is interesting. Anyway, I bedded down and intended to fall asleep listening to Venus's frequencies. People were saying they fell asleep listening to Saturn and got nightmares. I figured maybe we'll fall asleep to Venus and get happy nightmares. Now, someone in the comments described Venus as sounding like an ongoing gong with angels whisper singing in the background. And I can't completely disagree. However, oddly to me, it wasn't a comforting sound, and I love Venus. Venus is one of my favorite planets for tons of reasons. But the sounds of Venus gave me an eerie feeling. So I am lying in my bed with the 20 milligrams of melatonin and the 10 milligrams of L-theanine, listening. Entering that getting ready to fall asleep state of mind, like the slower brain waves or whatever, in which, like, typically when you're normally falling asleep, you'll start seeing, not actually seeing weird stuff, but instead of thinking about something and then having that image or thought in your head, thoughts start crossing into your mind like animals in front of a game camera. These thoughts and images just kind of show up as you're on your way into dreamland, getting into that space. And the eerie feeling kept ramping up. And normally, if I'm focusing on something while I'm trying to sleep, I stay awake and I focus on it. However, this time, the I was actually falling asleep, yet my focus kept getting higher. Like these sounds are an audible fog, and you are stepping into it physically in audio dimension. And stepping into this fog, two weird things happened. One, I started to hear voices behind the distant singing. Now, I couldn't make out what they were saying. It sounded like diner ASMR, diner conversations. However, I was completely aware these voices were not there. As in, if I snapped back to reality, I would no longer hear them, but as long as I was focusing on the singing in this space, I could hear conversations arising behind the voices that were not there, yet I could perceive them a little bit. And that sounds silly, a little eerie but silly. That's something you can write off. But then that combined with the second thing. So when I say you enter this fog audibly, what I mean is it feels like it's like a synesthesia thing, even though I hate synesthesia. It feels like you are feeling your way through a dense fog with your hands, except you aren't actually there and you're doing it audibly with your ears, but you feel it physically in hearing it. And I didn't feel like I was just wandering through fog in this weird way. I felt like I was feeling around and looking for something that was there to be found. But then the sensation changed a little bit, and it felt like whatever was out there to be found was looking for me and perceived me as its something to be found. So we're playing Marco Polo in this fog, and I pulled the plug before we could meet. Not that I think we would have met, probably, but it felt like we could have met, and it felt like we were getting very close to crashing into one another. It felt like the anticipation of a low to mid-level event, supernatural experience, turning not into a high-level event, but into an extreme-level event. As in, not just something you can't ignore, but something that is getting you. Now, I'm not saying something like that would happen, or maybe even could happen, but it felt like that was the way it was going. That was going to happen. I chickened out of what could have become something because I was frightened. And before we move on to the next thing, this makes me think a little bit about nuclear semiotics. You know, the idea that to mark nuclear waste sites for far future civilizations, we create big, scary architecture to warn them to stay away. I think that's not a good idea. And I think that's not a good idea because if we encountered some kind of semiotics right now, we would ignore them. For example, what if aliens do have some kind of danger semiotics, created some kind of danger semiotics, but instead of using architecture, they chose to use emotions, because a building can't force you to feel some kind of way. But if an emotion is beamed into you, then you have no choice but to feel that emotion. So they warn us away from locations or technologies or actions by beaming emotions into us, that emotions that will warn us away from those things. But we ignore them even though we feel them loud and clear. In fact, we feel them the way we're intended to feel them, but we don't translate them the way they're intended to be translated because we don't think emotions we feel are meant to communicate anything to us. We, as a society, dismiss the importance of what our emotions are trying to tell us. If you feel something and it doesn't line up with what other people are feeling or what your society tells you to feel, then it's wrong and needs to be adjusted, not this is a message that could potentially save you. And maybe was even given to you, placed there, beamed into you by someone or something trying to warn you. We don't perceive warnings as warnings because we aren't advanced enough as a species to listen to warnings, even when we hear them. We think what people say is more important than what the body feels or the eyes see. Something that came to mind, felt relevant, find the path without a book. Okay, the second sort of lifting the veil. The less theatrical one, the more linguistic one, the more communicative one rather than the more encountery or ambushy one. The more I do tarot, the more convicted I feel it is not at all for divination. Tarot and other tools like it are like shitty ramshackle telephones. As a species, we live in language prisons. We can't really or perceive outside language. Or we can, but we don't understand it. Or we dismiss it. In the same way, higher beings and maybe lower beings have their own language prisons. Or at least languages that prevent them from understanding us the way we understand ourselves, the same way we can't understand them the way they understand themselves. And with that barrier, overlap is very difficult. So, what these quotes divination tools actually are jury rigged lingua francas, trade languages. Entities translate their messages into tarot, and then you translate from tarot those messages into your language. You can't communicate directly, so you communicate through this neutral filter. And I like tarot especially because each card, it's not even the pictures on the cards necessarily, it's an intuitive practice. Each card feels like a hunk of uranium that puts out radiation, except they're all different metals with all their own different forms of radiation. Each card is its own thing and radiates its own energy, thereby not communicating a message, but serving to communicate messages passed over it, through it. And this works the more you let go, or more both sides let go. You are allowing chaos to serve as a table over which you can pass notes with entities. Whatever tool you're using, it needs to be substantial enough that messages can be translated through it without it being so exact that it becomes limited to your language. But there also needs to be enough element of chance for chaos to do its job as a lubricant. That's why I like tarot. It feels like as sophisticated a language as you can get, while also sacrificing your ability to control what's going on, making that lubricant really buttery smooth. And that's also why I think getting your cards read and reading cards for other people, I get a lot out of reading cards for other people, is so important in this because it's another layer of forfeiting control. If you're reading for someone, you don't know what their situation is, and that makes you more effective, that makes the messages more effective, and might create room for you to get messages out of it also, which I do a lot of the times. When I'm reading for people, I'm getting a lot out of it also. And in the same way, when someone is reading for you, it's not, or you are not the translator, and that margin of error makes the messaging better because you have less control over it. Or there's more opportunity or there's more space to get you the message you need to get gotten. And the reason I say this can be a lifting of the veil is spreads can get wacky. Sometimes the message is unclear and you'll need to think about it for a while or sit on it for a while until the message activates. Sometimes there's no message and you can feel when there's no message, and people think that means something has gone wrong, there's been a malfunction. Personally, I think that's as meaningful as getting some kind of a message. You just have to think about why it's not working or why something is choosing not to advise you. But then you have moments, spreads feel like knives that are puncturing something, they're so exact. Or, out of nowhere, the deck just starts freaking out and trying to force sixth dimensional information into someone's head. And that's what happened the other night. That was the hard work I was talking about. I've been reading for this dude for a while, and his spreads normally come out pretty good. Sometimes they're a little more confusing, whatever. Leading up to this one, pretty good, and then bam. Alright, fucker, come on, time to break through to the other side. The deck is screaming. And I don't know what that dude is going through, and I don't want to know what that dude is going through, because the less I know, the better able I am to do my job. But I can feel from the intensity of this spread, it's go time. It is time spiritually to breach and clear into the fourth dimension. And that's odd because spreads don't normally talk that way. You know the Master from the Venture Brothers? That's typically how the deck or how spreads feel. What they're saying is useful, but mainly they're just talking because speech is free. Sometimes it's a little more interested, sometimes it's a little less interested, sometimes it's mean. There is another semi-regular I read for, whom the deck really doesn't like and is snarky, and I have to try to tone down the snark a little bit. Rarely, if ever, does it start screaming alien extraplanar shit like that. Ramiel shit. Literally Ramiel, actually. It is the strange card was Swiftness, 8 of Wands reversed, when it went from building intensity to it's time to go, and where we're going is the other side. And that was part of what alerted me to the fact maybe we're in the middle of some kind of paranormal weather. And that same night, I had a couple really clean, sharp spreads. Or no, those other spreads might have been the night before. But those other spreads, I did 4 in a night. They were all pretty on the money, and then that one was like a hand grenade going off. And with all this stuff, chant stuff, language stuff, maybe that's one of the reasons single-player tabletop RPGs speak to me so much. Of course, the main mechanics in them are called oracles. Random number generation manually. These random numbers develop great, intimate stories, and I'm wondering if it's because these oracles, and of course, again, they're called oracles, serve as another lingua franca or trade language through which entities can communicate with you, except because this is a game, you get to engage with them less on a coaching or communication level and more on a fun, relaxed, playing a game with your friends level. I'm not sure. Regardless, summarizing, the veil is thin right now. I think there are ways to lift the veil if you want to, but even if you don't want to lift the veil because that's terrifying, or if you can't figure it out, remember I chickened out, so I don't know. And I don't know if I have the guts to try to see it all the way through. That was the other thing I was going to mention. The moment I turned off the Venus frequencies, I put on John Michael Gaudier talking about space. Maybe it's because these encounters are like witnessing their language, and when you witness it closer to their level than to yours, even though you don't understand it, it unsticks you from normality, and then to bring yourself back down or to secure your place back in normality, you listen to somebody talk. That's Terrence McKenna. He talked about in the depths of shrooms trips, what do? You sing. He says it's for like getting your body moving and stuff. I'm wondering if it's a language thing, as in when you encounter the alien, you ground yourself back in normality by using your language. Because your language, maybe it's not just a prison, it's also an anchor that keeps you safe when dealing with or when existing in a world within which there is so much alien. Your prison is a fortress and it keeps you imprisoned, but it also keeps you protected. And that's what your language is. That summary turned into a tangent and I lost my place. But fuck it. We don't need no summary. We're breaking through, bro. Like if you enjoyed, subscribe if you haven't.